Welcome back, everyone. It's Mike Mutzel with HighIntensityHealth.com. So fired up that you're with us today. We're live with Dave Asprey, the founder of Bulletproof Radio, and he's the author of the Bulletproof Diet. Lose up to a pound a day, reclaim your energy, and focus, upgrade your life. And so what's really unique about Dave's book is it's anything from conventional. He goes into some really cool stuff, not just about food, but gut hormones. He talks about bacteria. He talks about yeast and mold found in food, which is something that I think a lot of people are really not paying attention to, but yet it's having a huge impact on people's lives. So, Dave, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Mike. I'm a fan of your work.
Thank you. I'm fired up. So I think a lot of people know about you and know your background. So we can just really dive right into it and talk about some of the themes in your book and talk about lectins and anti-nutrients in food and mold. And let's maybe start out with mold because this is an area that you know a lot about. Tell us a little bit about where we're getting mold, why it's bad for us, and things that we can avoid.
Well, mold is omnipresent in our environment. It's like bacteria. In fact, there's this long-standing struggle between the dark and the light. Well, actually not, but it's just more, there's fungus and there's bacteria, and they've been fighting with each other for a long time for dominance. And it's all a fight over who gets to eat the cheese. And the definition of cheese may be old leaves, it may be the drywall in your house, and it may be the grains that are in your cupboard. But there's this low-level fight always happening. And if there's enough moisture for one, there's probably one for the other. So we've focused ourselves very heavily on, antibacteria, get rid of these bacteria. And as you know from your work looking at the gut biome, that's kind of backfired. Mm-hmm. But what few people are connecting right now is that this mold, it's not like the mold just infects us, which it can do, but the mold makes poisons. The most common mold poison we know of is called alcohol. It kind of has an effect on our brain. But the other one is penicillin. So this tiny little capsule, which is just the poison from mold from one species, Penicillium, that kind of transforms your gut bacteria. And in a normal world, the way we evolved, here's what happened. We'd walk along wearing our little loincloth, and we'd find, cabbage or something. And it would either be spoiled or not spoiled. And if it was spoiled, we were probably smart enough not to eat it. And if we were really hungry, we ate it anyway. We threw up, we got sick, and then we recovered. In the modern world, we take 100,000 cabbages and we feed them all into this giant machine. Some of them have mold, some of them have bacteria, some don't. And we sort of shred them all up, mix them all up, and then you get something which has some fungus on it and some mold toxin. So industrialization of food has homogenized the supply. And what that means is that we're exposed in our food to a chronic low-level stressor that doesn't cause a benefit. It doesn't cause a hormetic effect like you would get from exercise. The idea that a little bit makes me stronger, actually a little bit of these things just damages your DNA. A little bit more damages it some more, but it doesn't help. So we lose about 24% of the world's food supply to fungal contamination. And it's not like it's just black and white. Look, this has it, this doesn't. It's like most things in nature, it's a sliding spectrum. How wet is it today? Well, I don't know. The relative humidity is 45%. That means it's not actually dry or wet. It's a little bit wet. And the question for these mold toxins is, okay, how much is enough to kill you outright? How much is enough to cause cancer or heart disease? And how much is enough to make you less focused and tired today? Mm-hmm. And I'm focused on what takes me out of my prefrontal cortex, what makes me have a kind of a crappy, slow day and maybe grow muffin top. And it turns out it's a different amount than the one that makes you outright throw up or the one that is going to send you to the hospital with failing kidneys. We owe ourselves as high performance people to understand which toxins are harmful and which ones just slow you down a bit. And I believe there's a lot of toxins that slow you down, and I've started doing research about that.
Mm. I love that. And so 25% of our food supply we lose due to mold. You talk about Brazil nuts and walnuts and things that are on a lot of people's, quote unquote list of healthy foods. And this is, I was reading through your book on the Kindle and just was diving into it and really enjoyed it. So how can we minimize exposure? So what foods, it's laid out really well in your book, Dave, but share with us a little bit the top offenders here that, we're getting these small amounts of mold that may cause the brain fog and the muffin top. Where are they coming from?
Grains are the number one source. And this is really kind of scary, but when you feed grains, and that includes corn is a major source of fusarium-based mycotoxins because about 98% of corn gets infected as it's growing. And then we spray Roundup on the crop, which increases toxin production by about 500 times. So what used to be an annoying problem in corn is now like, wow, that's really bad for you problem in corn. This is one reason that dried corn products, even though they're gluten-free, are maybe not going to work for you. So grains for sure, but nuts are a big problem. We all know nuts mold. Like peanuts are the worst offender. And I'll say if you're listening to the show and you're into high performance and you want to live a long time, peanuts ought not to be on your diet. And it's not just because they're one of the moldiest foods. It's because they also are a source of very long chain fatty acids that don't fit well in your cell membrane. And those fats are overrepresented in people with Alzheimer's. So you're like getting bad fats that your body has a hard time dealing with, and you're getting a bunch of toxins that themselves contribute to the generation of bad fats in the body. So like, I'm sorry, I like peanut butter as much as the next of us. I just don't eat it because you can eat other nut butters that are better. And what you do with nuts is, if you want to be really, really kind of, paleo about it, you crack the nut and then you eat it because there's this natural protection around the nut, which is called the shell. And that keeps all the fats fresh and unoxidized, and it may or may not protect the inside from mold depending on the kind of mold. If you see a black moldy walnut that's the outside of it clearly has mold, it probably has filaments, hyphae that went to the inside and you don't want to eat it. But you're still better off to shell your nuts. But who's really going to do that? Like you're in a meeting, like with putting a nut on your bicep and just cracking it in front of all your friends. That's what I do, right? So what you do is you go to the crazy health food store run by hippies, extra points if they have dreadlocks and tattoos and stuff, and they're going to have a refrigerator, and the refrigerator is going to have nuts inside it. And it's like the simplest idea. You use temperature to protect your food from spoilage. Nuts spoil easily when they're out, but most people go to these bulk bins and buy nuts that are at room temperature, at room humidity, and those bins are rarely, if ever, sterilized. So it turns out bulk food is much moldier than non-bulk food. So one small step, this is just a ridiculous one. If you're going to eat, say, some walnuts or some almonds, go to the store and buy the ones that came in a bag instead of the bulk bin ones. And don't buy the slivered or finely chopped ones, because here's what food producers do. And I say this, Bulletproof is a food producer. I don't do this kind of stuff because it just makes me mad. But this is a very common decision, and it's not born out of evil. It's born out of economics. Here's a handful of nuts. These nuts are basically, let's say, they're a little bit off. They aren't pretty. We didn't actually test this batch to see if it had mold toxins, although maybe we were supposed to, maybe we weren't, but we tested some batches. So these ones are ugly. Now, if you sell them whole, no one wants to buy them because they're fugly. So you sliver them, and now you have expensive slivered almonds made of ones that you couldn't sell. So the uglier the nut, it could just be physical damage, but it's more likely that it has a slight fungal problem, enough to affect whether you get food cravings. And I see all the time, I've gotten this email before. Coffee is a major source of mold. So I make a coffee that's mold free because we change the production process and we lab test it to make sure that it doesn't have even very small amounts of mold that would be far in excess of the few standards that exist for coffee. And people say, Dave, I was just drinking some high-end organic coffee and I didn't believe the thing about mold, but I finally tried yours and my 2:00 afternoon energy crash just went away. Like this is the first day I tried it. Yeah. What happens is you get toxins in your food, and it might be from coffee, it might be from chocolate, those are high-risk foods, it might be from grains, and it might be from that industrial meat because you couldn't find, say, grass-fed meat. So you ate an animal that bioaccumulated mold toxins from its food supply, particularly pork is bad about that. And then a couple hours later, your body's like, I just got like a lot of mycotoxin. And there's two main things it's going to do, aside from mess up your gut biome and cause even biofilm formation. It's going to hit your liver or your kidneys. As humans, we generally suck at detoxing anyway.
Right.
The reason is that some animals, like a rat or a mouse, they'll take toxins and put it through their liver, which is a pretty good heavy-duty garbage disposal. You don't want to torture your liver with toxins, but it handles them pretty well. We do a lot in our kidneys and bladder. Particularly one of the toxins that's omnipresent, which is ochratoxin, and this is one that's most represented in beer, wine, coffee, chocolate. Even things like raisins can have it. And So it's there and you take it, and all of a sudden your body's like, I need to oxidize this toxin. Like I need to pump it out. So where do you get energy? Blood sugar? Yeah. So it sucks on your blood sugar reserves. It drops your blood sugar, and then your body says, could you please have the cookie? Right? And it sets up the food craving. And if there's not enough energy in the body, what's the most energy absorbing part of the energy using part of the body? It's our brain. Your prefrontal cortex has the most mitochondrial density in the body, so you feel it there first. And then you might even feel it in the cardiac system, and you'll feel it in the gut. Now, if you drink let's just say a really bad cup of coffee and you get that jittery feeling, you feel it in your head and your heart, right? And then what else happens? If you've ever had like a really just a nasty cup of coffee, usually you have to pee. You have an urgent need to pee, and you pee, and there isn't that much pee, and it's light colored. This isn't normal for us. The reason that happened is that the body's like, oh my God, there is a toxin that's affecting the bladder and kidneys. Pull water out of the body, out of the plasma. This is basically dehydrating. So these toxins are way more dehydrating than caffeine, which is a very mild diuretic. So now they've now diluted this stuff, and it says, now get it out. Send the signal to that dumb guy sitting in your head, the human, that says go to the bathroom, and then you walk over and you pee, and you go, I didn't have to pee very much. That's weird. This is how we handle toxins. But unless you recognize that this cup of coffee or this piece of meat is not the same as the one next to it, even if they functionally look the same, it's about what happened upstream. That's a huge thing to understand, because one of those foods messed up your gut biome, caused brain fog, gave you food craving, made you eat more, and made you have to pee more. And the other food, which probably tasted slightly better, just gave you great fuel, didn't have any anti-nutrients. It's that big of a deal.
Right. I love that. And a past guest on the show, Jeff Bland, he was famous for saying the solution for pollution is dilution, just like you said. So whether it's water in the colon or urination is one of the body's main reactions, just like you just said, Dave. So that's a nice mnemonic if people want to kind of remember that. And I love how you made that connection between inflammation and metabolism and the blood sugar shift. And so let's kind of hold that thought. I definitely want to dive into leptin and insulin, because that's how you introduce the book, and we can have a fun time with that. But just want to reinforce something you said that I think is so important. And it's, I shop at one of the hippie health food stores myself, but I actually, we introduced this call, this is anything but conventional. I go to the bins, and now, I would look at the plastic bags and think that's just more waste.
I
It's
agree.
more processed, whatever, but it makes a lot of sense now. Those bins, I'm envisioning the walnut bin at my, local co-op. It's dirty. It's got stuff, probably oxidized lipids and fats on the container. Who knows about the mold? So I think that's a really good point, Dave, is, just the economics of it. These producers of natural food are not going to put walnuts that are moldy in the bag. They're going to look good. So I love that tip. And you hit on something that I think has some controversy right now, and that's wine. There's all the wine polyphenols from the grapes and so forth are good for gut bacteria. There's some, studies showing that moderate alcohol consumption is good and so forth. But wine, as I read in your book and learned from you, is loaded with mold. So talk to us about alcohol and wine.
Well, I'm sorry to say this, but I did a lot of research on alcohol, and I stack ranked the alcohol, and the infographics available for free. In fact, I'm about to release a new one coming up here, an updated one on the Bulletproof site. But it turns out that unfiltered alcohol tends to have a lot of yeast metabolites, which trigger candida growth in the body. It also tends to contain substantial amounts of mold toxins, particularly ochratoxin A. So there are a lot of people who say, I can't have wine. It's it's the sulfites or sulfates. But then they have sulfate-free wine and they still have a problem. So in wine and beer, the two sort of worst ones, beer is a little bit worse than wine from a health perspective. What you're getting is you're getting ochratoxin A. Again, this same thing that keeps messing with us because we don't use it in our liver, we use it in our kidneys. And it's tied to cancer and DNA damage and lots of other things. But what happens with wine there is you get these people who are, we'll say, bad at math, and I say this in a not meant to be unkind way. Do you remember, like in seventh grade, the order of operation? Okay, so there's a thing. Please something. Parentheses, exponents, multiplication, etc. And so to do math, you have to know which ones come first. To do nutrition, you have to know which ones come first. And the first one is macronutrients. You got to get like the right ratios of the right macronutrients. It doesn't mean X amount of protein. It means X amount of the right protein because, well, as we all know, spider venom, which might be all protein, is not food, yet it's all protein. So obviously some proteins kill us, some don't. So just saying you need X amount of protein is a meaningless thing. So you can follow whatever framework you like. I've created the Bulletproof diet, and people can get the framework for free. You don't have to buy the brand new book, which is awesome and contains all that at your favorite bookseller. That was my plug. But actually, can I plug it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
If people go to orderbulletproofdietbook.com, you can send your receipt there, and I'll send you a whole bunch of free stuff, including the poster to put on your fridge that contains all the information that I'm saying as boiled down as I can into one sheet. So what happens on this thing is order of operations. You have get your macronutrients right. And here's the second thing that is commonly missing. It's anti-nutrients. You've got to avoid the anti-nutrients because every food has good stuff, which is the fuel in the food and the basic amino acids and lipids that are required, and maybe a little bit of carb. Then it has anti-nutrients. These are mycotoxins. These are oxalic acid. These are things that protect the food from predation or things that happen as the food starts to spoil. And they could also be man-made food additives, colors, chemicals, etc. And the final thing is micronutrients, things like calcium, magnesium, yeast, B vitamins. So one of my friends, very, very smart computer engineer, way overweight, type 2 diabetic, and I'm traveling with him. And we go to a hotel, and for breakfast he says, I'll have 2 bananas. And I look at him and I said, hey man, we're friends, and I know how smart you are. You have to have some rational logic for this. Yeah. And for people listening, if you have type 2 diabetes, you probably don't want to have a bunch of basically sugary fruit for breakfast because it's going to just throw you into unstable blood sugar all day long. And he looks at me with total sincerity as a guy who's clearly smarter than I am and says, well, bananas have potassium and I have high blood pressure, so I'm eating them. Okay. Order of operations there. The only thing he didn't do wrong is he didn't eat bananas with black spots, which are usually full of mycotoxin. So he avoided anti-nutrients, right, but he missed the first thing. So I would encourage everyone who's listening to think of food as, all right, did I get the stuff that I really needed here as the primary building blocks and fuel? Did I avoid substantial levels of toxins that have an impact on my biology? And your biology may be different than your friends, and there's a way to do that. And then did I get a lot of micronutrients as well? In the case of red wine and beer, what's going on? Well, let's see. Yeah, beer does have B vitamins. So you could ignore the first 2 things in the order of operations and say, oh, I got B vitamins from my beer. I'm a good person. And I would counter that with, no, you're someone who likes beer and you're trying to justify it with B vitamins.
Right.
But if you look at what brewer's yeast does in terms of cancer, by the way, you can do that on PubMed. I'm not making that up. Like there's 900 studies linking that kind of yeast. I think, okay, don't quote me on the 900. That might be 900 for heart disease. Anyway, there are hundreds of studies on the effect of baker's and brewer's yeast and all sorts of not positive health effects in people. Same thing with red wine. You want some polyphenols? I'm really sorry, Mike, to tell you this, but if you want polyphenols, the number one source of polyphenols in the American diet is not red wine, not even close. It would be coffee. And next up would be chocolate. So the idea that you're going to have alcohol, which causes aging when it breaks down into aldehyde in the liver, especially by depleting glutathione, plus a bunch of ochratoxin and other toxins, plus an increase in the amount of yeast growing in your body, and probably some histamine as well. And you're going to take all that stuff in order to get a little bit of polyphenol. Like, I'm sorry, eat a dark chocolate bar. It's not that hard, and it's equally enjoyable. And I like red wine like the rest of us, but if I do have it, which is very rare, usually it's because it's like older than I am, and then of course you have to have some. Right. I take activated coconut charcoal. Full disclosure, I manufacture the finest particle activated charcoal on the planet, so I have a vested interest in saying I take that, except I started manufacturing it because it binds better than the larger particle that you get normally. So activated charcoal is proven to bind to one of the 3 classes of mycotoxins, and it'll reduce the hangover and the inflammation you get from drinking that allegedly healthy red wine. So you can take steps to do that. If I am going to drink, I also take some of the glutathione force. Again, this is something that I make. I make it for my own use, but other people take it too. This is a special encapsulation of glutathione, which is the primary detoxing substance in the liver. And the glutathione in your body is present in almost every cell and very heavily in the brain. So when it gets depleted, in fact, you start getting liver disease and liver damage when you run out of it. Vitamin C is a precursor to glutathione, but when you take it in the right emulsion, the way that we do it in glutathione force, it absorbs quite well through the gut because we use a lipid to let it absorb through the gut tied to a molecule called the lactoferrin. It's the only way to get it into the gut as efficiently as we do. Okay. So those things will help with the alcohol problems, but just drink vodka. Like then you just have the aldehyde problem. You don't have all the mycotoxins because it's distilled.
Right. And you talked about whiskey too in your book. Do you want to hit on that?
Yeah, in fact, whiskey, vodka, those things are generally at the high end. Those are in the safest part of the spectrum. The way that the Bulletproof diet, it is a roadmap, and it's meant to encompass all foods and beverages. So the idea is, all right, which ones are least inflammatory with the most nutrition? Which ones are kind of close? And you sort of stack rank down. So you don't have to worry about being perfect. You're like, well, okay, if I was going to drink beer, maybe switching to red wine's a better move. But if I was going to drink red wine, maybe I ought to just kick it up a notch and switch to whiskey. Now, whiskey comes from grain. There's a few antioxidants in whiskey that are useful that aren't in vodka, but it does come from grain, and it's not quite as filtered as vodka, but it's still distilled, so it's pretty darn clean. So I recommend whiskey, tequila, and vodka, probably in that order. Although you could argue that whiskey is probably about as good as tequila. We're dealing with tiny percentages here, but because tequila is not from a grain and whiskey is, maybe tequila gets a leg up, and vodka from potatoes would be a superior thing. So, it's at that point though, a shot of tequila, shot of whiskey, shot of gin, which is high up on the list as well. You're basically going to let your liver handle the alcohol. And you're not going to cause all the trouble, especially with yeast and changes in the gut biome, not positive changes that are going to come from drinking unfiltered yeast excrement.
Right. Really well said there. And just want to reinforce, we're not necessarily encouraging everyone goes out and drinks, but should you drink, these are better options. Is that right, Dave?
As a matter of fact, I'll just say it. And I'm sorry because this sucks. Alcohol is not a health food. It's a recreational substance and one that's relatively hard on the body, one that contributes to cancer and particularly to aging because of what it does when the alcohol hits the liver. The first step is it goes to an aldehyde. And aldehydes they're damaging of the tissues. They cause advanced glycation end products, the same as eating a lot of fructose. So they tend to age the lining of your arteries and they tend to give you wrinkly skin. So unless you really, really love what's in that glass in front of you, I would suggest not drinking it and have something else like, I guess I'm boring, except I have a lot of fun. But I'll have the sparkling water with lime in it, or something like that. I'm drinking some sparkling water right now, nice. And I just don't miss alcohol. Maybe if you need some social lubrication, you should work on your autonomic stress response for a little while. And there's biohacking technologies, even stuff I write about in the Bulletproof Diet book about stress reduction. Because stress from eating a toxin in your food, stress from exercising too much, stress from your substantial other yelling at you, or job stress, all of those things are stressors. So if you have social anxiety and you cure it with 5 beers, like address the social anxiety, and then you can get rid of that stress, and then you can get rid of the biological stress of having 5 beers. And maybe you only have one, or maybe you'll switch to having a shot of vodka or vodka soda, and you feel like you still got some kind of alcohol that you enjoyed, but you just didn't feel like you needed it the way you did before. Mm-hmm. So it's not like a teetotaling message at all. It's that acknowledge alcohol has a biological cost, counter that cost with the right, essentially, supplements as much as you can, and then just don't trick yourself into saying that alcohol's healthy. It's not, but that's okay. You can still have it. You're still a good person if you have something that's unhealthy. Like, people cheat. It's cool.
Right. Love that. Yeah. So just minimize your risk, and you highlighted a lot of ways we can do that, Dave. And you touched on so much there that I would love to dive into. But first of all, and most importantly, I want to make sure that all our listeners, let's talk about that book bonus again, because that infographic you made, I have it downloaded. It's really awesome. So we want people to go check out the book, and they can get that information where again?
You can go to order bulletproofdietbook.com. Awesome. But if you want just the infographic, right now you can pick up your phone and text to 58885 just text the word BP diet for Bulletproof Diet and then your email address, and it'll just end up in your inbox. So you don't even have to like go find your email app. Just send a text 5885, the word BP diet, and then your email, and it'll all just happen.
Love that. Love technology. Really great. So we'll put that in the show notes to everyone at highintensityhealth.com. So great information. Now, you started the book off with appetite, satiety, and metabolism. And I loved how we share similar wavelengths on this, Dave, where we're kind of over insulin. We've been talking about insulin for a long, long time, but there's so many other appetite hormones, gut hormones, things like leptin. And we know that the anti-nutrients from our food, as I learned from you in your book, can affect these appetite signaling hormones, like lectins can affect leptin. So walk us through this journey where so many people are fixated on insulin, and we know insulin's really bad. I'm not poo-pooing insulin, but there's many other players here. Tell us your journey and story and a little bit of background on that.
It's really interesting. I weighed 300 pounds. I've lost 100 pounds. If you're watching the video right now on High Intensity Health, I mean, you can see like I don't know, I look pretty good for a 42-year-old guy. Like I don't know, I have moderate biceps and I'm pretty thin, and like I'm happy with how I look, given that I exercise very little, high intensity exercise once every week or two is all it takes to look like this, as long as you eat right. And when I look back at this journey, I had a lot of food cravings and I just thought I was hungry. So I remember when I was maybe 26, 27, I was in an influential position at a company, and like the company wouldn't do new products unless I was on board. So I'd have these meetings with 10 people, and 11:45, right before lunch would come, and I'd be like, sorry guys, I'm just ending the meeting now, because if I don't go eat, I'm going to have to kill one of you and eat your arm. I'm just that, like, I just can't go another minute. And I would just walk out of the meeting, and they'd be like, but we had stuff to do. I'm like, I don't care. I need chicken. Right. So that wasn't my attempt to be rude. That was me experiencing such profound food cravings that I was losing my ability to think, and it was making me feel angry and agitated. So this was my body. And in the book, I write about like the signals from the body. They're all survival signals. It felt like I was going to die. I didn't think I was going to die, but I was getting a signal from the meat operating system that said, impending crisis, you're going to die. Well, okay, so I'd run down and I'd do this. What was going on there was, for me, a complex mix of things that I've since sorted through, and I was more extreme than the average person. Most people just get really tired and cranky and maybe, don't pay any attention in the meeting, but they just, sit through it and then go eat. Or they eat candy. And this is why when you go to meetings, there's always that little bowl of candy there. It's institutionalized. We know you're going to crash, so you might as well suck on some candy, because you're so unable to manage your own biology that you can't even pay attention or focus because your energy is like bouncing all over the place. Well, what's going on there is a whole bunch of different hormones are affecting hunger. So there's environmental inputs. You can actually breathe mold, or you can breathe that magic marker. That'll cause a sugar craving. If your liver's like, oh my God, that's a lot of toxin, I better dump that organic solvent, you'll crave sugar 5 minutes later. It's really predictable once you become aware of these things. So you get those things, and then you get all these hormones that come from your food. So if you're a bean or grain, or actually even anything, kale, even lettuce has some of this stuff. Celery. All of these foods did not evolve for us to eat them. They actually evolved to reproduce the same way we did. So if you're a little piece of wheat, your goal in life is to grow up and, have a whole little family of wheats. Pass on the family genes, the whole thing. Now, that means that since you can't run away, you sort of failed that evolutionary branch you could have taken. You cover yourself in things that make you less attractive to bugs, fungus, and larger predators. And then larger predators are like, well, that's stupid. Like if you're a bird and you're supposed to eat grain, then you have all these enzymes and ways to disable those things. If you're a human and you try and eat like a bird, those things will actually affect you. And those things are so present that a common example that's in the book is like kale. I live on a soon-to-be organic farm. It's actually already organic, but it's soon to be a farm. I'm just turning it into one. But I know from having grown up with animals, try and take kale, raw kale, and feed it to a horse. The horse is going to look at you like you're stupid and be like, could you give me some grass or an apple or something? Because it can taste the antioxidant in the kale. But we're like, I put kale in my smoothie and I add a bunch of fruit to it so I can like trick my body into accepting it without like wanting to throw up. But that thing was in the kale to prevent you from eating it, to make it so it wouldn't be as healthy. So there's good stuff in kale, which is why we ought to cook it to deactivate some of the bad stuff. But we go through this kind of complex thing in the book, and lectins are one of the primary defense systems that's used by a lot of plants. Now, lectins are not good or bad. We use lectins as signaling molecules in our body all the time. These are basically proteins that are attracted to different types of sugars, and most of the cells in your body are lined with sugar, with polysaccharides. In fact, scientists used to call it junk sugar until they realized, oops, it's kind of important. So what we do then with these lectins is they come into our body, and depending on your gut makeup, depending on your biome potentially, and certainly depending on your genetic situation, these things will come into the body and they can affect leptin. So lectin, which is essentially used as a defense molecule, then turns on leptin with a P, and your leptin levels control hunger and cravings. So if you are one of the people who responds to a food that contains a certain type of lectin, like potatoes or sweet potatoes or whole grains, then you're likely to experience changes in leptin, which can make you leptin resistant. Now, leptin is something that happens before insulin happens. So you get to be resistant to the hormone leptin because you keep smacking it over the head by eating lectins. So lectins made you leptin resistant, which happened before insulin resistance, which happened before diabetes. I am a biohacker. It's all about hacking the human body. And my background actually is decision support systems, which is a subset of artificial intelligence. And I really was a hacker, not a black hat bad hacker. I worked, in computer security for quite a while. So I think about how do you get into the system? And sometimes you get into the system early on. And in the case of the Bulletproof diet, well, understanding that this leads to this, leads to this, the typical way that we've been trained as consumers of over-the-counter medical stuff, and as well as even our medical schools going back hundreds of years, we start looking at symptoms. And you start at the top of these symptoms. Okay, well, you've got type 2 diabetes. Well, maybe we can, the very progressive people, let's go back to the insulin resistance. What's in pre-diabetes? Well, when you keep peeling these things back, like, well, what if you stopped whacking yourself over the head with lectin so that you would stop having leptin swings, so that you would have less cravings, which would already reinforce your behavior? My perspective was like that, but rather than being preventative, I don't want to get diabetes later. Heck, I had pre-diabetes. Like my blood sugar was unstable. I had all sorts of weird health problems when I weighed 300 pounds. I wanted to have stable energy all day long with zero food cravings ever again. And what I have found in the Bulletproof diet, and I write about this from different angles, is that you do own your biology, and your body is an exquisite instrument that responds to the environment around you. So if the environment around you is set up right, and you can do that, we have all these cool things that let you do it. Like you can control what you put in your body. When that happens, you do own your biology. And if you have a food craving, it's your fault. It's because you did something wrong earlier in the day or the day before, and you triggered it, and you just don't know what that was. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person or you failed. It's an opportunity to go, wow, I just got a signal that I screwed up, so maybe I can do it better next time. And when you apply that hundreds of times a day and you go, why am I tired now? Right? You should really pay attention to the details because there's a reason. And when you find it, it's liberating to walk around just not caring about the cookie in front of you in the conference room. There's a bowl of candy and you don't even see it because it's not interesting to you. And it hasn't been interesting in years. Like, wow. For me to be able to do that when I was the guy who had to end meetings to go eat because I was so hungry and cranky, I have more energy than I ever have, and it's because I've addressed that mitochondrial energy thing, and I've addressed this leptin, and even ghrelin, another hunger hormone, is in there. So it's totally doable. You just need to know the levers, and the Bulletproof Diet infographic, when we talked about, basically says eat these foods, because these are the ones that aren't going to cause the cravings. They're going to cause the maximum fuel that are going to sort of make you feel good. Look at these suspect foods in the middle. Don't eat any of those for a little while. And then add them back one at a time to see which ones are your personal kryptonite. And at the bottom, there's kryptonite foods, which are basically foods that no one should eat unless they're going to die of starvation. And if you're able to listen to this podcast, you're probably not dying of starvation.
Right. Really well said there, Dave. And I love how you wrap that in, that connection. And just so everyone, again, lectins, drive leptin resistance, and that affects your hunger and appetite, satiety, but also the inflammatory response too. And so for folks that want to dive more into that, if you go to bellyfateffect.com, I have some videos on that if you want to learn more
Oh,
about
cool.
leptin resistance, and the connection with gut bacteria as well. And that's a whole nother thing, Dave. For you talk about in your book, and we know this is really hot right now, the gut microbiome. I think you just had a podcast about resistant starch, and you dive into this in your book. So share with us some ways that we can ramp up our gut microbiome, and some foods and maybe herbs, spices, coffee, chocolate. Like, what are your favorite ways to really get our microbiome helping us to curb these cravings and upregulate our metabolism?
I love that question. I love it that you're paying so much attention to it in your book as well, because the gut biome is something that has been frustrating for me. I was on antibiotics just about every month for 15 years as a young man because I had chronic sinus infections, which, by the way, are caused by fungus, not by bacteria. And most people have chronic ones. I had those just every month, so I was on antibiotics just over and over and over, which wrecks your gut biome. And I have probably spent something like $50,000 on probiotics over the past 20 years. I mean, I have taken pig whipworm eggs from Thailand. I've experimented with unusual stinky substances that are supposed to make your gut better so many times. And it turns out that one of the most important things that grows in your gut, especially for weight loss and for reducing food cravings, isn't something you can buy. It's something that you feed. And as I dug into the gut biome and these hunger signals, I looked at something called FEOF, or fasting-induced adipose factor. And it turns out that when you fast or when you eat, your liver uses this hormone, amongst many others, to control the fat storage. That's why it's called adipose factor. And when you have germ-free mice, you can feed them buckets of food and they will not get fat. They're just like, they walk around looking like Clark Kent. And how is this possible? Then you put a few pellets of mouse poop in their cage, which inoculates them with normal gut bacteria for mice, and they get 60% body fat on the same diet in 2 weeks. So they just inflate. Well, here's why. These little bastards in our gut biome, they're not all good for us. So we've just discovered that lots of them modify behavior. So in fact, they can cause mental changes that affect how social you want to be, risk-taking behaviors. Basically, we're a walking support system for our gut biome from the gut biome's perspective. So the gut biome has learned. In fact, these are the Firmicutes family, which is one of the big families of stuff in the gut. They've learned to make their own fasting-induced adipose factor because, hey, your liver might not be good enough, and if the operating system for the bacteria dies, they die, and they don't want their host to die. Mm-hmm. So they make sure that when there's sugar in the diet, they'll grow, and they'll be like, oh, great, there's food. Store extra fat in case the gut biome, I want you to survive, big host, so just store extra fat. And they make you do that. This is entirely separate from insulin. This is entirely separate from triglycerides, from the whole way that we think about storing fat. This is a nasty signal that your liver made just fine that a bacteria decided for you to do. And this is one reason that fat people have more Firmicutes and less Bacteroidetes. So it's a ratio thing. And they've shown you can take gut bacteria from fat people, give them to thin people, they get fat, and vice versa. Well, how do you get more Bacteroidetes and less Firmicutes? You don't want to get rid of Firmicutes. They include lactobacilli. They're good for you. But too many of them, or too many of them making fasting-induced adipose factor all the time, are really bad for you. So, wow, this is complex.
Right. It's good, though.
So here's the trick. When you eat, and I actually reference a study in my book. It's a mouse study, but it actually supported my hypothesis, one of like 10 hypothesi, if that's a word, for why Bulletproof coffee has this slimming and satisfying effect that goes beyond what it should do, even when you take like too much of it. Like I found that I was trying to gain weight drinking like 1,200 calories of Bulletproof coffee in the morning, and I couldn't do it. And I'm like, okay, this doesn't make sense. So I really dug in on this, and FEOF is one of the things that came out of it. And when you take fat, butter, and particularly this brain octane oil, bacteria hate brain octane oil. So it suppresses all of the gut bacteria. And if you have no sugar and you have no protein, they have no food. They stop telling you to store fat and they start telling you to burn fat, which is kind of cool. Like, uh-oh, there must be a famine. And if there's a famine, I better tell my host to burn its extra fat because I wanted to make sure that it didn't die. Like, I only need one bacteria left in here. And as soon as there's more sugar, I can grow again. So just don't let the host die. So you're the host. I'm sorry. Like, there's a hacker in your stomach changing your fat storage for its own good, not for yours. And that's not cool. So what do? You smack the hacker over the head with Bulletproof coffee, which just so happens to be one of the richest sources of polyphenols. This is a natural antioxidant. It's also the fuel for bacteroidetes. So what you just did is you put an environmental stressor on everything in the gut, which is okay because it doesn't kill everything. It just suppresses them and makes them stop telling you to store fat. And then you feed the thin people bacteria, the ones you can't supplement. So over time, and we see this in like uBiome results or in American Gut Project kind of things, what we see is an increase in bacteroidetes. And I haven't done like a formal study on this. These are just anecdotal results from people who are on the Bulletproof diet, from my staff, from my own gut biome. And it's interesting, almost 2 years ago at the first Bulletproof biohacking conference, uBiome came out very, very early in this genetic sequencing of the gut. They came out and ended up like selling enough kits to hit their funding levels. So like I'm a giant fan of this. And just to be able to see my own results and go, oh, look, I have more thin people bacteria than the average person. That's because polyphenols from chocolate, polyphenols from leafy green, brightly colored vegetables, and polyphenols from coffee can help with these bacteroidetes. That's what they eat. And if you don't also have sugar at the same time, you won't feed the firmicutes and you'll just shift your ratios to look like a thin person. So your ratios look like a thin person. And when that happens, you might look like a thin person too.
Love that, Dave. Really well said there. And that's really in your book laid out really well. Then you dive into all the different fruits and vegetables that we should eat, like blueberries and much more. So awesome connection there. And let's finish off on something that you talk about in your book, and I think a lot of people kind of forget, and that's cooking method. We've talked about like toxic sugar and advanced glycation end products. I think we hinted on it just a little bit, but I think that's something a lot of people, they want to eat paleo, they throw this stuff on the barbecue because that's what our, ancestral humans did. But talk to us about your preferred cooking method and things we should be aware of.
I'll talk a little bit about how this stuff came about. I run something called the Silicon Valley Health Institute. It's an anti-aging research and education group that's been around for almost 20 years. And for the past decade, I've been one of its leaders. I'm the chairman now, and I've been president for a while. So for all this time, we've had anti-aging experts and nutritionists and like people doing amazing research come and give a lecture for decades. And I've had a chance to meet these people and talk with them. So yes, we talk about advanced glycation end products, and we talk about, the role of oxidized lipids in cancer and inflammation and things like that. And when I first went down, this path, it's been more than a decade of working with the Bulletproof diet style of eating. I've also been a raw vegan, by the way. I never quite paleo. In fact, I didn't even know about paleo until apparently it had been a trend for several years because I was coming at this from an anti-aging perspective. And we want to have healthy animal protein with fewer anti-nutrients, which is why grass-fed is so important. In fact, paleo nutrition, it doesn't acknowledge this, but the paleo diet is naturally relatively low in mycotoxins. So a lot of people, in my opinion, are responding to it, in addition to the fact that it has less sugar and all that stuff, just because we've eliminated mycotoxins by going with grass-fed animals and stopping eating grains. So that said, you take that nice chunk of grass-fed animal and you burn the crap out of it. You sear it at 500 degrees in a pan and you cook it for a very long time. Well, what happens when those fat molecules fall onto charcoal is they make oxidized lipids that cause inflammation. So I was doing that for a while. I'm also keenly aware of my inflammation levels because I've spent 7 weeks with electrodes stuck to my head monitoring my cognitive behavior in a program called 40 Years of Zen. So I've done essentially the equivalent of years and years of meditation. And I can tell you when my brain won't do what it's supposed to do because I can be in the zone all day, every day. And the reason I spend all the time is because I never had that. So I'm grateful there. And I have this ability to go, something in that meal, it didn't knock me out, although sometimes that happens. Something in that meal just made it hard because when your biology is tuned, things are easy. Like things that you would think are hard, they just come. And when that hard, when I grill my food, sometimes things aren't easy afterwards. What's going on? So I looked at what happens when you caramelize a protein. There are studies, though, that show that eating advanced glycation end products doesn't raise the body's levels of them that much. In fact, I think that the damaged fats are a much bigger issue. And things like PAH that come from that are much, much worse than dietary advanced glycation end products. But the bottom line is, if you cook your food at high temperature, especially fats, the most fragile, most important foods like that, and if you cook some proteins, they denature in such a way that your body doesn't get to take advantage of the di and tripeptides. And so all of these foods are signaling molecules for your gut biome, and they're also signals for your body. And you even absorb the genetics from some of these foods. So overcooking your foods, microwaving your foods, deep frying your foods, they always make you weak compared to lightly cooking or steaming or essentially gently cooking foods. So I've changed my approach to cooking meats, particularly, where I'll use convection oven, but under 320 degrees. And I put antioxidant spices, the stuff that I talk about in the book, on my meat, things like turmeric and oregano and rosemary, in order to reduce oxidized fats. Because the more damaged, heavily cooked fats you eat, especially things like egg yolks, things like olive oil, the more harmful it is. And it's a cumulative effect. So why give yourself biological stresses when you could actually eat foods that make you feel good and taste good? So the Bulletproof diet, the recipes in the book, are ones where we actually want the food to be intact after it's cooked. So it tastes good, it's creamy, it's delicious, it's amazing, but it causes less inflammation because we didn't damage the fats and the proteins, and we didn't bind the sugar to the proteins in a way that's probably bad for you.
Mm-hmm. Really well said there, Dave. And you hit on something there that reminded me of a story that you told in your book. And this was the fact that after eating sushi, you realized your balance was off. And I think this is something that's really important. A lot of people are so focused on weight loss, but different mental cues, whether it's mental acuity or struggle to retrieve words, or as you mentioned, things become more difficult, can be a cue that something's affecting both your metabolism and your brain. So I love that, using balance and things. So any other tips besides, say, word retrieval, focus, concentration? What are some other common signs that would involve neurological impairment from our diet that you could recommend?
It's interesting. I did a study of mycotoxins in coffee. We had a group of people take 7 different tests of executive function. These are computer-based tests from my friends over at Quantified Mind. And these are the same tests they use in university studies. They, for a few weeks, would drink coffee from their corner coffee shop. And then for a few weeks, they would drink the coffee beans, the Bulletproof ones that are lab tested for mycotoxin levels. And the difference was that, and this is a statistically significant and IRB approved study, in 6 of 7 measures, there were improvements in subtle measures of executive function on the beans without the mold. That's really interesting. You're not going to see these things, but even something as simple as a standard vigilance test, where you look at your phone, you look at your computer, and as soon as something that you're looking for shows up on the screen, you press a button. It's boring. You sit there for 30 seconds waiting for something. Wait. And as soon as it comes up, you press a button. And the amount of time it takes you to press the button is a great quantitative measure of how fast your brain works. Could you pay attention? It's kind of important. Mm-hmm. So if you find that it takes you half a second and then you eat some stuff, here's a good test. Go eat pizza and beer, right? And then wait and find it takes you 3/4 of a second. Mm-hmm. Your brain is about your conscious thinking brain is about a 350 millisecond delay. So if it's underneath that, it's kind of invisible to you unless you've done advanced meditation and you've developed some more awareness. Mm-hmm. And that means that when your nervous system is slower by 100 milliseconds, a tenth of a second, you don't know it unless you measure it. So I just did as part of the Bulletproof Diet book launch for Take Part Live, I took my score on the vigilance test, and we took the host's score, and mine was 413, his was 473. So mine was 0.4 of a second, his was roughly half a second. These are milliseconds. And interestingly, I gave him unfair advantage, one of the mitochondrial enhancing substances that I make the stuff. and GABA wave, one of the other things I do that. So we basically gave him a relaxing substance and an energizing substance. And then he took his test again and he kicked my ass. He was down to 327 10 minutes later. So what happened there was entirely invisible to him and invisible to me. But he went from being slower than me to being faster than me by changing his mitochondrial function. And this goes back to why? Well, this wasn't a test of neurotoxins that come in coffee and come in food commonly, but this was a test of what happens when you get your mitochondria working all the way. Your brain really does work better. And at its very core, when you peel off lots of these layers, the practices in the Bulletproof diet are about getting your mitochondria rejuvenated, getting them to burn fat and glucose. Because when your mitochondria work, your prefrontal cortex, the human part of your brain works. And then you're nicer to people because you can tell the reptile and Labrador parts of your brain to shut the hell up when they're misbehaving. And if you can just do that, like, you'll be a better parent, you'll be a better boss, a better employee, and just a better person. Mm-hmm. So get the neurotoxins out, the subtle ones that you don't know are affecting you, because when you do that, you're actually a better person.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Really well said. And we'll put links to all these different products that we're talking about here. highintensityhealth.com/bulletproof diet. All links to Dave's websites and so forth. So Dave, excellent information. I love your work, love your book. I would encourage everyone to go to Amazon and definitely get this. There's so much there that this is a nice resource. You outline many foods, nectarines, peaches, pears, apples. Like, you go through everything and talk about all the different details there. So keep it up. And the last question, Dave, if you were in an elevator with, say, Barack Obama or a congressman, and you just had one elevator ride, 30 or 60 seconds to share with them one tip, one lifestyle tip, health tip, something that you feel would improve the health of Americans, what would that tip be and why?
Wow, that is the coolest question. So the most important thing I would say is, for God's sake, fix our soil, because it is the root of our food supply. But that doesn't mean anything to a congressperson or president, because it's too many steps removed from our current crisis. So what I would tell them is, it is vital for our children and our old people that they burn fat and sugar for fuel, so that we can help ourselves with diseases of aging and even things like autism. The number one way I know to do that is brain octane oil, which is something I make. It's 6% of the oil in coconut oil. But if you don't have that, at least include a tablespoon of coconut oil in your diet. It's not that hard to do. And on Bulletproof Radio, I've interviewed Mary Newport, who basically reversed her husband's early onset Alzheimer's with coconut oil and stuff like that. So it is tragic to me to see harmful lipids, like highly fried corn and soybean and canola oils, fed to children and fed to old people in nursing homes and hospitals. Those have no place in kids' diets. And if you put grass-fed butter and you put coconut oil, and better yet, this brain octane oil, because it just shuts down cravings and it helps brains think. I'm on it right now. It was in my Bulletproof coffee. Yes. That is something I would encourage them to do. And just say, like, come on, get some of the right fats in our diet. Coconut oil by itself is better than nothing, but it's only 6% as effective as the stuff that we can do today. So let's start taking control of our biology, and this is the first way to do it, to help the two most vulnerable populations we have.
Love that. Use fat to fight fat. Really great. Yes. Well said there, Dave. So I know you have many different websites. So if our listeners want to learn more about you, what's the best online resource where they can contact you?
You can go to bulletproofexec.com, which stands for Bulletproof Executive. And my products are at bulletproof.com. And they're separate for a reason. The information I provide is free, and it's there to help people. There's more than 250,000 words. You can get the infographic, which is the spine, the skeleton of the book. I give it away for free, and I always have, because it's that important. Learn about Bulletproof coffee, make it the right way with mold-free beans. Just try it once and see if you can tell the difference, because I know you can. And go from there.
Love it. Dave, thanks so much for being here. I really enjoyed talking with you.
It was a pleasure, Mike. Thanks for having me on.